The Doctor in the TARDIS. Next stop everywhere.
Again, everyone. Welcome back to Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast. I'm Charles Skaggs, one of your co-hosts here today, back in the TARDIS, ready to talk some very, very, very classic Doctor Who with the Time Meddler here at episode 153. And joining me once again as special guest companion is Italy's finest DJ, one of our favorite special guest companions here on Next Stop Everywhere. You know him, you love him, you can't live without him. DJ Nik, welcome back to Next Stop Everywhere.
Hey, Charles, well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. You know, I told you, you keep flattering me more and more as time moves on here. You know, now, before you gave me a big head, here you have me blushing, and I really appreciate it. And thanks so much for having me back on. I'm really happy to be here.
Obviously, you're always welcome to join us here. We just appreciate you having you here because you bring so much life and energy to the show, and give us a much more cosmopolitan feel, which I kind of like.
Well, thank you. We do our best. What can I say?
Exactly.
It's wonderful to bring. It's wonderful to bring it over to Italy to the show. Exactly,
and you make us feel more worldly, and that's good, and well traveled. So everybody, obviously, if you listen to Next Stop Everywhere, you know Nik's fine work here, as we've talked about the Enemy of the World and Revelation of the Daleks and others. Obviously, Nik was a big part of our episode, 150th episode, where we talked the Stolen Earth, Journey's End, in that big 2.5-hour extravaganza, and he's back here. Obviously, we're going to talk the Time Meddler from the William Hartnell era, and this was a story that Nik suggested. So, Nik, I'm kind of curious before we get started, what was it that kind of intrigued you about talking about this story?
Well, as you know, as I've said before, Charles, I've always been a huge fan of the classic Who era. Mm-hmm. Having, once again, mentioned that famous marathon I went through, and this was one of the episodes that really hit me. I think it's kind of like the Enemy of the World for Troughton, because it really stands out, and I think also it was the very first time that we got another Time Lord. Right. So a milestone episode for that reason too, and I just love the episode as a whole, and just how the monk interacts with the Doctor and what they have going on. He's not as menacing, of course, as the Master we would get later on, but I think it's a nice introduction to the Doctor Who lore, that there are other Time Lords out there.
Yeah, he almost seems like almost a prototype Master. Obviously, he's not nearly as menacing, but it is the first time we actually get to meet someone from the Doctor's own race that wasn't Susan. And it does finally expand his mythos a little bit. That there are other Time Lords, there are other TARDISes, it's not just his. And, there was obviously, when the show first started, there was the implication that, well, he created this. He created the TARDIS. And obviously, as the show progressed, we kind of learned, no, he didn't create it, he just stole it. And went into exile from his own people as a result. And this is the first time that he comes across someone from Gallifrey, presumably, and it's kind of interesting to see the Doctor playing off another time traveler in the story. And obviously they're two completely different mindsets. The Doctor, is obviously very old and stodgy in his thinking, has his own set of ethical standards, and then the monk, meanwhile, obviously has very little. He's very shady, he's very unscrupulous, and he's has an agenda to disrupt the flow of history, which obviously goes against everything the Doctor learned on Gallifrey, and the Doctor works very hard to try to prevent that.
Exactly. I think it could also almost be, and it could always give an idea to the audiences, what would the Doctor be like if he went bad, or if he decided not to be as, shall we say, ethical in what he does in his time traveling? I think, at least for the audience of the time, it could have been an idea of, this is what could happen if the Doctor went to the dark side, as it were.
Yeah, and it does provide contrast, which is great, because it kind of shows that the Doctor is that good time traveler who's trying to play by the rules of time. He's not trying to affect history. He just wants to explore it, and he's not out to change anything. He just wants to see it. So therefore, when the monk comes along, obviously they have kind of an ethical clash, as it were.
Yes.
And it makes for some interesting viewing, especially. Had to be very interesting to people in 1965 when this story aired. That it brought something new to the table for the series. In a series that was still already just barely getting off the ground. This is still only season 2 when this story aired. This is the 9th and final serial of season 2, written by Dennis Spooner, who wrote such stories as The Reign of Terror, or The Romans, or The Daleks' Master Plan, which is the other story that the monk appears in after this one. So yes, he does get out of that exile eventually. And it was directed by Douglas Camfield, one of the original classic directors of the original William Hartnell era. And obviously stars William Hartnell as the First Doctor, Maureen O'Brien as Vicki, and we get Peter Purves as Stephen Taylor, who had just joined at the very end of the previous story, The Chase, which saw the departure of Ian and Barbara. And so essentially this is where we finally get the next generation TARDIS team. We from the originals of the First Doctor, Susan, Ian, and Barbara. Susan obviously had left in the Dalek invasion of Earth. Ian and Barbara just left the previous story. So the Doctor is kind of now without the original crew. And from here, so we kind of get this is probably a very pivotal time where audiences were probably left wondering if they should kind of stick around with the series or not.
True, because I think a lot of people did also get attached to of course, Ian and Barbara, and they might have felt a little bit bereft after the fact they'd left, and they're kind of like, there might have been also a lot of speculation as how's the show going to go on from here. Granted, okay, Susan had left way before then, but these were two very important characters. It's like, how are you going to replace them? How are the dynamics going to change within the TARDIS? And just moving on, is it going to be as good as it was?
Right. And I think this story proves that, yes, the new TARDIS team, I think it works. I think Stephen and Vicki work, and we'll talk about them shortly in one of our topics. But it's definitely a new dynamic. Stephen is a little more confrontational than Ian, provides a little bit of a contrast. And he's got some fun moments that we'll talk about where at first he's not quite sold on the idea that he's in a time machine. Has to be convinced of that.
He's very much a doubting Dennis, as one might say. But the interesting thing is, I also thought I suppose they had to put in another character a la Ian because the Doctor being more frail.
Right.
They maybe needed somebody to do the heavy lifting.
Yeah, you needed
like Ian did. So
they a younger, stronger male to kind of balance off against, you have an older gentleman and a young girl. So obviously they probably felt they needed that leading man type character in the show. And Stephen fulfills that nicely. But thankfully he's not just there to be the white male hero. He's got a personality to him. And
definitely, he's more than just muscle.
Yeah, and he's willing to kind of trade barbs with the Doctor. He doesn't just roll over for everything the Doctor says, and that makes him interesting to me. And like I said, we'll talk about him more. But guest cast, obviously we have Peter Butterworth as the monk, and who doesn't appear again until a few stories later with the Daleks' master plan. And then we have Althea Carlton, probably Carlton, as Edith, the Saxon wife in the story. She was actually in the very first Doctor Who story. She played a character named Hur, H-U-R. I see what you did there, writers. One of the cave women in that story. And we had Rondell Rich as Gunnar the Giant, and he played a character named Trantis in the Mission to the Unknown, which was like a single episode prequel or prelude to the Daleks' master plan. And then he was also, believe it or not, in the James Bond movie You Only Live Twice as Ernst Stavro Blofeld's bodyguard. So, nice Doctor Who connection there, and again to James Bond. And we had Norman Hartley, who played Ulf, one of the Vikings. He turns up later in a Patrick Troughton story, The Invasion, one of my personal favorite stories from the Troughton era. He plays a character named Sergeant Peters in that one.
Ooh.
So kind of
quite a cast already. But isn't it interesting? There's so many references to James Bond. I think it might even fuel the fan theory that James Bond is a Time Lord. Because there is that theory going on.
Yeah, I think you kind of perpetuated that theory the last time you were here.
Yes, I did. I'm fueling fan theories here.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, before we get started, Nick, I hope I wasn't out of place by rocking my Whiskey and Cigarettes show T-shirt.
Oh, wow. So, that looks awesome. It definitely looks great on you. We appreciate that.
So I thought, in your honor, I thought I'd wear the official shirt of Whiskey and Cigarettes.
Oh, well, thank you very, very much.
So,
As I said,
I hope you approve.
You're definitely going to be our poster child, for sure. We're going to have to put you on billboards and such, I reckon.
Okay. I hope it's not wanted poster child, but we'll see.
That remains to be seen.
All right. I guess I have to watch myself. I'll watch my P's and Q's. All right. A little bit of trivia before we get started. Episodes 1, 3, and 4 were missing from the BBC archives, as a lot of fans know, classic fans know. Because of the BBC's purge, and edited recordings of all 4 episodes were returned to the BBC from, of all places, Nigeria in 1985. So somehow the Time Meddler wound up in Nigeria, and but thankfully everything was returned, so we have a complete story without any animation that kind of fill in the gaps. We had complete copies of episodes 1 and 3 were returned in 1992. And there's 12 seconds missing from episode 4. And that is because there was some footage removed by censors that depicted 2 Vikings running through sword-wielding Saxons. So essentially we had some Vikings killing some Saxons. And the BBC censors at the time presumably decided that's a little too violent for the kiddies, and they essentially edited out those 12 seconds. But apparently they're missing. Now the audio survives, and I believe you can hear the audio on the Time Meddler DVD. There's an actual special feature for that if you want to check it out. It's not really all that great. It's just basically people going "arg, arg," and then you die. But that's about it.
We can happily do without it. I mean, we can leave it to people's imagination.
I think I probably just saved you 12 seconds by just explaining that.
Exactly.
Now, also in this story is kind of interesting because William Hartnell is completely missing from episode 2. If you noticed.
Yep.
He was on holiday. And what they did, especially during the William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton eras, anytime one of the cast decided, oh, I need a vacation, they didn't just stop production. They just took an episode off and were written out of an episode for the week. So, because
apparently, in fact, when they walk on when the Doctor is imprisoned, apparently that's like either his recorded voice or somebody doing his voice.
He recorded audio for that, and that's a pre-tape recording, and so, and there's that scene where you see the food tray flying back at the monk, and I'm sure that had to be a stagehand filling in off camera, and probably had a lot of fun throwing food at Peter Butterworth.
Indeed. You know what? I actually had a theory that it might have been the chamber pot, but that might be a little too much.
I think it was the food tray because he had just brought in the food tray, but that would have been a little gross, I would think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because I think the monk would have been a little more angrier about that.
Had it been the chamber pot?
If it had been the chamber pot, yeah, exactly. But hopefully at least the Doctor got a chamber pot while he was in prison, because that would be even more awkward. All right, let's get into our main topics. So the first topic I want to talk about, let's talk about the Doctor right off the bat, but I also want to talk about the Saxons in this segment, because the Doctor kind of has some moments with the Saxons, especially Edith. The kind of Saxon chieftain's wife, and but I want to talk about him. I want to talk about the monk in a separate segment, so we can talk more about the Doctor's problems with the monk. But what was your impression of William Hartnell in this story?
It was one of his stronger ones, even though apparently this was already one of the times we know from what I've heard and read and such, William Hartnell was a bit of a prima donna.
Right.
So he was kind of trying to act a bit of like a rock star. And at this point, he wasn't apparently very happy with the way production was going. And he was continuously having fights with people and was being a little bit, should we say, hard to work with. But regardless of that, he did an incredible job on this. I really love how even grouchier and even more curmudgeon-y he is in this one. Mm-hmm. But also how it also shows, I think, how clever the Doctor is. Because it seems like he's been defeated in multiple situations during this serial. But it's wonderful to see how he figures out, the workings, how to work out everything, how to defeat his enemies at the end of the day. And I absolutely love the exchange he has with Edith. I fell in love with Edith, I must say. I mean, who isn't happy with this wonderful woman who first sees you, offers you mead, right. Makes you feel right at home, and I just adored her. There was something there that I was just like totally taken by her and how welcoming and kind she was, and also the way William Hartnell played off her. The whole mead exchange was great. Like, this is mead. Oh, mead, of course. It was like incredible. So yes, I loved Hartnell throughout this, and it was one of the episodes which really cemented him for me as one of my favorite Doctors in the Classic Who era.
Yeah, Edith was interesting. Edith, she's kind of like my mom. She's
you're very lucky there.
She's very friendly, and every time you come by, there's all kinds of food and things, and things waiting for you. Like there's this moment, like you talked about, with the Doctor and Edith, where he's drinking the mead, and he drinks it like about maybe a third or a half of it, and it looks like he's not going to drink anymore. And then Edith comes by and kind of takes his little flagon, or that little horn, drinking horn. And she's like, oh, here, let me go just get you another one. And it's like, I'm sure there's still some in there, but she seems to think, oh, it's not full, so he must want more. And so she goes off to do that. And I like the fact that, obviously, I think Edith was the brains of the Saxons that we see in this episode. She's the one toward the end of the story that kind of convinces the other Saxons, her husband and the other Saxons, that, hey, the monk is the one who's being all shady, and he's the one that's working with the Vikings. So, we should believe the old man. And it's really the monk who's our enemy here. And so credit to her for not being fooled like most characters are in Doctor Who that we see in similar circumstances. Blaming the Doctor for everything when it's actually, the bad guy.
And it's great to see in, such early times, the mid-60s or whatever, that a female character, or maybe even in that kind of society, rather than just being, shall we say, the homemaker and giving birth to children,
right,
is more than that. And I think that might also be because of the fact that Verity Lambert was still behind the scenes. So she probably wanted to give women a stronger portrayal.
Right.
I think that might have been to do with that. And that's why I really appreciate it, that she wasn't just, running around screaming or just, helping men and almost being subservient to men, but almost being an equal to men in this case.
Yeah, I think you bring up an excellent point because another little bit of trivia for this story is that this is Verity Lambert's last story for Doctor Who. She obviously moved on. If you watched the great documentary movie, An Adventure in Space and Time, you kind of have an understanding of how hard that was for her to leave. But obviously she did that for her career to move on. And but she obviously left her mark. And when I was doing my rewatch on my Time Meddler DVD, I noticed that they had dedicated this story to Verity Lambert and her passing, which had probably just happened shortly after the DVD came out, I'm guessing, or somewhere in there. So somewhere, shortly, obviously before, because it's dedicated on the DVD, but probably within that time frame. And she obviously left a major mark on the series. She's one of the co-creators of the show. And I think you're right. I think Verity Lambert's influence was that, obviously compared to today's standards, maybe the women were not portrayed as strongly as they are today. But by 1960 standards, I think they were portrayed a lot stronger than they would have been for 1960.
Oh, yes. And I think it also shows maybe part of Verity's fight crusade that she had to carry forward, because you mentioned An Adventure in Space and Time, which is an excellent movie. Anybody who hasn't seen it has to see it, because It's just incredible. And the fact that all the hardships that she had to endure when she took on Doctor Who as a whole, because I believe she was actually kind of laughed at, or a lot of people made jokes of like, have you been sleeping with the producer or this kind of thing. So it might have been, she might put part of that of herself into the female characters to make them strong, because she was a strong woman in of herself as well.
Yes, I totally agree. And now one of the other things that you brought up that I thought was interesting is you brought up that how resourceful the Doctor is in this story. There's one scene where he kind of has to pressure the monk into taking him back to his TARDIS. And he threatens him with what the monk thinks is a Winchester rifle, when it's actually just a regular tree branch. That somehow the Doctor is like, oh, okay, this is close enough to a Winchester as far as, length and width, I guess. And so he points that at the monk's back, and the monk falls for it completely. And but it shows, here's the Doctor thinking on his feet. And ultimately, when he does kind of leave his trap for the monk at the end, it's again a great example of how resourceful the Doctor is to come up with a very clever way of marooning the monk in this time period.
Definitely, and that's why probably I so love the Doctor, because to go on a tangent here, one of my favorite all-time Greek mythology heroes was Ulysses, or Odysseus, because of the fact that he might not have been the best fighter, but he was an incredibly tactical person and was always thinking on his feet. And there was, maybe it's just me, I saw a little bit of Ulysses in the way that Hartnell, takes on the Doctor, because what he doesn't have in strength, he makes up in mind power. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciated that. That's probably maybe also what drew me to William Hartnell even more so. Granted, we see him in other episodes or other serials where even though he doesn't use violence, he can knock people out just by, moving out of the way. But that's something that I also really love about this particular Doctor. Yeah,
he seems to be capable about hitting Vikings on the head with balsa wood.
Yeah. Exactly. How many people can say they know how to do that?
So that's probably as violent as the Doctor gets, but it's kind of funny to see that very thin, flimsy wood break over somebody's head, and that knocks the Viking out. It's pretty funny, but yeah, this is one of the things that is so appealing about early Doctor Who is that, for me at least, is that it shows how the Doctor isn't obviously your typical hero. He's a hero who fights with his brain, and he doesn't fight with muscles. He doesn't, he doesn't. I mean, the closest he gets obviously is in the John Pertwee era, where he's doing judo flips of people. Yeah. But it's mostly by and large he outthinks them, he outwits them. And here, for the first time, he actually has to outwit a member of his own race. And as a result, it obviously it had, I think, more weight than had it been just some random time traveler. It mattered more. It was more personal to him that this time traveler was actually a member of his own species.
Oh, yes. I mean, that obviously upped the ante because you're dealing with somebody whose intellect is just as elevated as his own.
Right.
Because he's been used to dealing with humans and sometimes aliens, but none maybe at his level, shall we say, of intellect. So that, I think, was also an interesting introduction to the series as well.
Yeah. And obviously the Doctor has to kind of adjust to Stephen being aboard the TARDIS. As one of his new companions. Initially he's actually very welcoming to Stephen. He doesn't try to discourage him, like if you remember in the original An Unearthly Child, how dismissive he was of Ian and Barbara even stepping into his TARDIS. And with Stephen, it's not really a problem. He's happy that he's there. Probably maybe because Ian and Barbara are no longer there. And so he normally, and it kind of shows how the Doctor has changed by this point, is that he was so initially confrontational and secretive and private. And now that he's traveled a bit and softened a bit, he's much more easygoing about who he travels with, I think.
Yeah, I think it's also a credit to the writers who developed the character, because they gave him depth and allowed the character to evolve. Because as you were mentioning, An Unearthly Child, he's not the same Time Lord he was in An Unearthly Child going up to here. And it's only been, this was, I believe, as you were saying, the end of the second season. So there has been time for the Doctor to grow, and I think it definitely is a credit to the writers. They fleshed him out so much. And because I think it might have been boring if he had always been so sort of confrontational with everybody. And it humanizes him more. And I think it makes him more endearing to us as viewers, I think, too.
I agree totally. And I think part of that also is because maybe initially Susan was around, so he felt more protective of her. And so he wasn't as trusting to anyone else that might be around her. But with her gone in the Dalek invasion of Earth, maybe he's not as protective of Vicki, and so he accepts Stephen more easily. Perhaps, if you kind of get where I'm going with that.
Oh no, definitely. It's kind of like the protective father's like, you want to date my daughter, kind of thing.
All right. Anything else more about the First Doctor before we move on?
No, I think we pretty much covered all the ground that they needed to be covered.
Okay, so while on the subject of new companions, let's talk in our second topic. Let's talk Stephen and Vicki. Vicki, who we haven't really talked much about here on Next Stop Everywhere. We haven't really gotten much of a chance. Obviously, she was brought in as a replacement for Susan, much more young. I want to say, somewhat impressionable girl, but very eager for adventure and very protective of the Doctor. And but obviously, with the departure of Ian and Barbara, they needed somebody to kind of for Vicki to play off on when the Doctor wasn't around. So they brought in Stephen, Peter Purves, and these two seem to have a pretty decent amount of chemistry right off the bat. Or is that just me reading too much into that?
No, it's definitely not just you, Charles. I think that Vicki and this, I think as a trio, they really work together. And I absolutely love how much Vicki believes in the Doctor and how supportive she is of him. Because as soon as Stephen tries to kind of knock him down a few pegs, she's immediately rushing to his rescue, saying, no, it's not like that. And, you got to believe this guy. And I really appreciate that. I was kind of like, I thought it was really... As you said, it could be the fact that she's young and impressionable, and she maybe looks to the Doctor as a father figure,
right?
And so she's kind of rushing to her dad's rescue, as it were. But the casting was brilliant because just the three of them just make such a great team, regardless of the fact. Of course, you have Stephen, who's more confrontational at first, but they do end up gelling well together, and I think it's definitely a recipe for success with these three in the TARDIS.
Yeah, it does make for a very good dynamic. Obviously, I think it helps also the fact that kind of pair back from having 4 characters in the TARDIS to just 3, and so we kind of get to see Stephen do quite a bit in this story, his very first story, full story, and as opposed to when he made his debut in The Chase, and I think it's I think it was a smart idea to kind of have him paired off with Vicki at first, because Vicki is the one, because she's a companion just like him, and can kind of be the one who convinces him and get him past his initial skepticism that he was in a time machine. And
yes.
So now they kind of play up a little bit off of that. They have Stephen being very skeptical that he actually traveled in time, and it doesn't help that when he comes across some Saxons that attack him, that one of them is wearing a wristwatch given to him by the monk. And so, Stephen takes that watch, but his whole impression is, well, we can't be back in Viking times because this guy has a wristwatch. And obviously we find out there's a reason for that. But you can kind of understand where Stephen's coming from, going, well, how am I supposed to trust you? Because this doesn't seem exactly very authentic, now does it?
No, this is very true. There is the one thing that I was wondering, speaking of Stephen, is what's with the panda teddy bear?
Yeah, the mascot. Yeah, that was if you watch The Chase, that was this thing. I think it was because Stephen was because he came from the far future.
Yeah, that's where they first find him.
And he was very isolated. So he had this stuffed animal, the stuffed panda, and he called it the mascot. And so it's kind of like if you ever saw the Tom Hanks movie Castaway, where Tom Hanks, he's isolated on an island, stranded and marooned, and all he has is this volleyball to kind of keep him company. So he kind of personalizes it and starts calling it Wilson, and he starts talking to it. So my guess is that the mascot was essentially the only quote unquote person that Stephen had to talk to. So he was very attached to it.
Well, I'm glad they kind of got rid of it, to be honest, because it was a little bit jarring sometimes to see this man walking around with this panda bear. As much as we love stuffed animals. Don't get me wrong. Any stuffed animals listening, we love you guys.
It wasn't a good look.
Exactly, it was just kind of a little bit weird, but. Yeah. But outside of that, no. I think you made a good point there about the fact of first letting Stephen and Vicki pair off, so that I guess it's good because Vicki kind of is almost us, because we have traveled with the Doctor like Vicki, and Stephen is the new guy, and so it's almost her perspective, us looking through Vicky's eyes at this new guy. We believe because we've seen certain things happen, and at least, you know, I'm very vocal when I'm watching Doctor Who, so I was kind of yelling at the TV at some point, being, "Stop being such, you know, believe for God's sake."
Like,
you know,
what's your problem, man? You're in a, like, you can buy a machine that's bigger on the inside than it is outside, but you can't handle time travel.
Exactly. At first, I was like, "Stop being such a tool and get with the program," you know.
Yeah, but obviously he comes around eventually. There's this great moment in episode 3 where he finally admits to Vicki, "Okay, now I kind of believe that we're time traveled," and she's like, "Finally, you
exactly.
get it."
With the audience, everyone's like, "Hallelujah!" You know, now we can move on.
But he does have some, you know, some funny moments. You know, you mentioned, and it actually it's pretty observant way that Vicki is essentially, because of Stephen, Vicki is the one who gets to explain the TARDIS, gets to explain the show, and as a result, she's the one who kind of is speaking to new viewers that may be just checking out the show for the first time.
Yep, exactly. Because everything was, you didn't have VCRs, so you couldn't watch the old episodes. So good point. It could be like a recap of what happened before.
Yeah, you know, and you probably still had people just starting to check out, you know, like they knew that their friends were into it, watching the show because of the Daleks or what have you. And so maybe they heard about it but didn't jump on board right away. But eventually they checked out the show. So someone had to bring the new viewers up to speed, and Vicki explaining that to Stephen was a great way to do that.
Oh yes, I think that was probably also her function of certain scenes that we saw with her and Stephen, was to bring people up to speed. I guess kind of like, you know, with comics, when you end up halfway through a run and you haven't had the chance to check out the previous issues, and like there are, you know, throwbacks to what happened before. It's like, see issue 255 or whatever, or they might repeat things that you know, other people have read at the beginning of a particular comic book run, for example.
Exactly, and you know, and like with comics, you know, Doctor Who, any story is someone's first Doctor Who story. So it's always good, especially for writers, to kind of keep in mind that, hey, maybe someone watching the show may not be completely up on the past, what is it, you know, now 66 years of Doctor Who. I mean 56 years, excuse me. Now I'm jumping ahead. 56 years of Doctor Who. And so, yeah, they may not know everything. So maybe you kind of need to explain them some things once in a while. And I kind of like, you know, Stephen, they make good use of that, like when Vicky's explaining the TARDIS, and then there's this great moment where Stephen kind of shoots back, and with, you know, she explains, you know, TARDIS, time and relative dimensions in space, and he shoots back with IDBI, I don't believe it.
That was some clever banter there.
Yeah, it was.
I think the writers were definitely on their A game in this particular serial, I have to say.
Yeah, Dennis Spooner is actually probably from the Hartnell era, is one of my favorite writers from the Hartnell era. He writes some very clever dialogue, and he brings a lot of characterization. And if you notice, the monk has some very funny lines in this story, and with the Doctor, and then you know, the Doctor obviously gets great lines, and we'll talk about some of those later, obviously. But it helped to kind of introduce Stephen to Doctor Who fans, and by giving them that personality right off the bat, and probably helped people accept him because of Vicki learning and the Doctor learning to accept him as well.
Oh, I can't but agree. But and also, of course, it's great writing, and two, of course, you have to have the right actors so that certain lines don't fall flat.
Yeah.
And you know, you mentioned, of course, Mr. Butterworth, and he did an incredible job with what he was given. So right. I think it's of course a coming together of great skills of the writers on one side and the actors interpreting it in the right way to where, you know, you weren't like, oh, yeah, that's not funny at all, you know. So it's also a question of that too.
Yeah, and I think you just gave me a nice, perfect segue into our third topic. So let's talk about the monk. finally, and let's talk about the Vikings as well, because we find the monk has a plan. It's not the best plan, but it's a plan. And his plan, as we find out, is essentially to lure the Vikings to the coast, to destroy the Viking fleet. And the reason he wants to do this is to shore up King Harold to such an extent that he won't lose the Battle of Hastings. And supposedly this is to stabilize England and somehow benefit Western civilization, although exactly how, I'm not quite sure. But it's Doctor Who. Once again, you roll with it, I guess. What did you think of the monk's plan? Was it a good idea? Was it well thought out, or was it a little confusing?
Well, first off, how many villains actually have a checklist of the things they have to do?
Right? I gotta give credit. Now, obviously, he cared about this a lot. He took the point, like, he didn't just write it down on a piece of paper. You know, he went the full 9 yards. He created a scroll. He got out the parchment. He's, doing this in ink and going, like, making these big, checklist boxes. Like, okay, I have to signal the Vikings. They come ashore. And then I try to blow them up with this atomic cannon and so on and so on. And, and he has this thing mounted, like, like it's something like one of those old projector screens that you pull down, that where you put you projected things onto in class for demonstration, and then he kind of rolls it back up when he's done with it, and I thought that was just hilarious that he went to such length just for a simple little checklist. Like, it couldn't just be a scrap of paper on his pocket. He had to go this whole elaborate thing. So obviously he cared about this a lot.
My question is, though, the last point on the checklist is he wants to meet the king. Now, my question is, what is he going to do once he's met the king? Does he want to take a selfie with him or something like that?
Exactly. Well, maybe, he's like, maybe I can get an autograph and I can throw this up on, I can go ahead to 2019 and throw it up on eBay and make some money.
Exactly, because hey, I'm the guy who did all this stuff. Hey,
this is original King's signature, King Harold's signature. So
that was brilliant. I think it was obviously, I think, was one for comedic relief. I think at one point, more than anything, at least from my perspective, because I think it was just too exaggerated and too embellished to be taken seriously. I think it was them kind of wanting to make it a little bit funny. But yeah, the plan itself is kind of hilarious, and it's not exactly mind-boggling and mind-blowing.
Right.
But I love how relentless he is and how dedicated he is. So, my hat goes off to him for wanting to pursue this with such, gusto and such passion. So I appreciate that. And as I was saying before, Butterworth does an incredible job portraying this character. Granted, he's not evil for evil's sake, so it's not like you don't feel the guy is bad as bad can be, but he's obviously a threat.
Yeah.
But I think he's
kind of like, to put it in comic book terms, he's not exactly Lex Luthor or Brainiac. He's more like Mr. Mxyzptlk.
Exactly. Yes, that's right.
He's the imp that's causing chaos, but he's not evil per se.
He just wants to have a good, maybe not necessarily a good time, but he's more of a trickster kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, he's more of a trickster character. And now, he does some horrible things. He's perfectly willing to have the Vikings come and come ashore and kill a whole bunch of Saxons. He doesn't care about them whatsoever. He just wants to get the Vikings to shore so that he can kill them. He doesn't care if they kill the Saxons. So in that regard, he's kind of like the Master, that lack of empathy. But as far as just being pure evil, I don't think he's anywhere near the Master's level.
No, this is very true. And also, I love the fact that when he's trying to do stuff and people come knocking at the door, it's like, oh, seriously?
I'll be there in a minute. Hold on.
Exactly. He's like, I'm trying to work here. Why are people constantly coming to me? And funny story, he's supposed to be a monk. I don't know whether this was a the, should we say, ignorance of the Saxons or not, but they refer to him as father. And I believe that you don't address a monk as father, but rather as brother.
Right.
So that was something, I don't know if it's me nitpicking or if it's just, something that I will notice.
I'm not sure. Maybe because they thought that he was the head of the monastery. Maybe they called him father and others they would call brother. I don't know. But
it's just a thing.
It's a Doctor Who. It's not exactly, completely historically accurate at times, but, you bring up a good point, I think, that I kind of wondered, you would think, well, maybe why isn't the monk, shouldn't he have like a vow of silence or something? But this monk seems very, very chatty.
Very true. And he's very good at playing the fact of being villainous, but, when the Saxons show up, to bring him food and such, he suddenly becomes immediately very benevolent and it's like, yes, my child, and this kind of thing. And he does it to perfection. And I love how well he switches, within himself of not just being kind of, twiddling his thumbs and laughing happily, but actually being able to pull off the man of the cloth who's there for the people.
And one of the things I love about the monk is just the way he kind of gives himself away through his anachronisms. Like if you notice, you kind of have to wonder what he did all that time by himself in the monastery. But you get a little of an impression, because we do see a little bit, some of it, where he essentially cooks himself. He's making the doctor breakfast.
And what a breakfast! It's not like a prisoner's breakfast.
No. He goes he's like, he's got like a griddle, and he's pouring himself batter to make pancakes or what have you, and he's using more. He's got like a toaster now. He kind of burns the toast, but maybe he likes it extra crispy. I don't know, but it's kind of funny that he would surround himself with kind of more modern 20th century cooking devices. And, he doesn't have anything better in his own TARDIS to cook with.
You're thinking, what happened to the microwave?
Yeah, exactly. Where is the microwave? You think so? Okay, you've got like a waffle griddle. Or a pancake griddle. And you've got a toaster. Where is the microwave? Oh, wait, it hasn't been invented yet, as far as the show. Exactly. Yeah, so at least more mainstream microwaves, like home convection ovens and whatnot. But you think the monk would be aware of that, right? No.
Exactly. He takes good care of his prisoners, though, because I've never seen a prisoner being given the full English breakfast.
He
lock me up today if you give me bacon, eggs, and toast.
It's you probably have like orange juice and maybe I've expected him to go over there and ask the doctor, well, do you want English breakfast tea or orange pekoe or offer him a full selection or chamomile, perhaps.
Yeah, a paper with your breakfast.
Would you like your slippers, sir?
Exactly. That was a very nice touch. I mean, he's a villain, but he takes care of his prisoners.
Exactly. You got to give him credit for that, right? He does at least offer the full hospitality treatment with his prisoners. Or maybe because he figures, well, all right, the doctor's someone from his home planet, so maybe I'll go a little bit extra for him. I don't know. Or maybe he figures that he wants to impress the doctor, maybe in his own perverted way, even though he's locking him up. He probably wants to treat him well so that, maybe I could win him over to my great plan.
Oh yes, indeed. And then
because he's very proud of showing off his TARDIS, if you noticed.
Oh yes, I mean he is definitely he definitely loves to especially with the doctors who are like, this is what I've done, and I believe he actually says his model of TARDIS is the next model compared to the Doctor's. I'm not sure if I remember that correctly or not. Yeah. Because I think it's like the new model or something of that nature.
Well, obviously, Vicki asked the Doctor if that man his TARDIS was newer than the Doctor's, and he does make a comment that it was a Mark IV. Although we know that the Doctor's is a Type 40. but that wasn't, I don't think, established until much later on on the show. So, is a Mark IV newer than a Type 40? I guess so. We don't know.
I suppose so. And at least this one, the cloaking device works.
Yes, exactly. Yes, yeah. The monk took great pride in the fact that he kind of taunted the doctor a little bit. That, oh yeah, hey, I've got a working chameleon circuit, not you. How's yours doing?
Exactly.
And the doctor's like, well, mine's working just fine, thank you. But working just fine indeed, yes. But pretty funny. Now, obviously, the big confrontation, or actually, I should say, the big resolution to the monk ends up where the doctor, with Stephen and Vicky's help, essentially does this thing with a string, where he's able to kind of yank this dimensional stabilizer out of the monk's TARDIS after they exit it, and as a result, it shrinks the interior of the monk's TARDIS down to much smaller size so that he can't fit into it and escape. Exactly. And the monk is just horrified once he finds out that the doctor has stranded him there. And it was kind of interesting to see the doctor. I don't want to say it was cruel. In the monk's case, I think it was very justified. But what did you make of the doctor, the way his decision to go to that length to maroon the monk in that time period?
It might have been a little extreme, but at the same time, you think to yourself, what else could he have done? I guess alternatively, he could have maybe taken the monk into custody, as it were, taken him into the TARDIS, and hey, we might have been able to see Gallifrey for who knows. We might have taken him off to the Time Lords, saying, this guy tried to do this, this, and this, and handing him over to the Time Lords. So we could have gotten Gallifrey and all that way before time, which would have been, excuse me, an interesting take. But I suppose at the same time, it shows that the Doctor can sometimes be a little bit heavy-handed when it comes to meting out punishment. Because you think to yourself, you're leaving this guy in 1065 or 1066 with nothing, pretty much. Because you also think to yourself, once he's finished all his supplies and everything else, what's he going to do? Right. And you've pretty much left this guy to die.
Not only that, the Doctor's essentially left a guy with knowledge of the future stranded in the past.
Exactly.
So once he's done, obviously this plan with William the Conqueror and whatnot, once that falls by the wayside, what happens? What's the monk's next move? What's his next plan? What's he going to do next? I mean, you've kind of left him there with a lot of time on his hands because you took away his TARDIS. So what other events is he going to screw up with history now? I had one.
You make a very good point, because for all we know, he could have ingratiated himself to William the Conqueror, saying, I can make you even more powerful because I know this, 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 and this. Mm-hmm. And so the Doctor could have made a massive screw up by leaving him there. I mean, granted, the ramifications, we don't really get to see the ramifications always, because here's the thing. I've seen bits of the Dalek Master Plan, but it's not really resolved. The monk's story isn't resolved too much. I mean, we don't really get to know what happened in the interim. So, he could have actually made things way worse, leaving him stranded there. You make a very good point there. I agree. I've not thought of it that way.
I think with just, that's me being the writer here going well, there's some story potential here that I'm sure Big Finish is more than happy to pick up on, because I think they brought the monk back in some stories. But it seems like, that's a really kind of a bad idea to leave a guy with knowledge of the future stuck in the past, to me.
And you think, you being a writer yourself,
yes,
you're definitely leaving quite some threads hanging there for people to pick up on and say, what can we do with this? Do the return of the monk or something of this nature, or the Doctor has to go back because time has gone completely out of control because of the monk. So you could have made him even more of a menace to
because he's going to be bitter and resentful of the fact that the Doctor stranded him there. So it makes him more of a threat, maybe.
Exactly.
Maybe it made him a little more unhinged, perhaps. But But yeah, this is essentially this is the kind of the William Hartnell version of the no second chances doctor. You know,
Exactly, just like
yeah, like no second chances. I'm that kind of doctor. Yeah, that kind of thing.
well, Peter Capaldi would be very proud of him.
I was thinking David Tennant, but
well, I suppose maybe both. So I guess it is part. I mean,
the Time Lord, kind of like this is the Hartnell version of the Time Lord Victorious.
Very true, but see, it's great that they carried that trait on throughout, and it became more pronounced in New Who with Tennant and with Capaldi when it came to meting out punishments to those who deserved it in inverted commas.
Exactly. So I guess there's something here for the modern era fans to appreciate.
Oh yes.
All right. Anything else about the story before we move into our favorite quotes?
No, I would say, as I mentioned before, all in all, it was just an incredible story. For anybody who has yet to see it, definitely check it out. I would, whoever, listeners, grab a copy of the DVD because it's absolutely brilliant. Even if it is, it was a 1960s story, it's very compelling, it's great fun. And even if it's the only Hartnell episode you ever see, I would say make this your Hartnell episode.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites. I wouldn't say it, because I think my favorite Hartnell story is the Dalek invasion of Earth. But I'd say this is right up there, shortly, right behind it. Probably this story and the 10th Planet are I think, those are my three favorite Hartnell stories.
Oh well, yeah. There you
maybe the first Dalek story as well, but there's this is definitely one of the best from the Hartnell era for sure.
Yeah, and you just name checked there some of my all-time favorite Hartnell stories, and you put me in a bit of a position because I'm like, yeah, that's right. There's the 10th Planet. I love that.
Now the debate becomes a little trickier, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. You threw in a couple of shots there, which I was like, yeah.
That's what man makes a point. See, that's what I'm there for, just to complicate matters. Perfectly. That's my job. All right. Favorite lines. Do you have any favorite lines from this story?
Oh, I definitely have a few. Well, I mean, we were talking about the fact of the banter between the Doctor and Stephen. One of them, for example, was when they find the helmet on the beach.
Yes.
And the Doctor is like, where is it here? Yes, it's a bit rusted, but it's not as old as that. 10th, 11th century England. Well, there you are, young man. What do you think of that now, eh? A Viking helmet. It's like, oh, maybe? What do you mean, maybe? What do you think it is? A space helmet for a cow?
That's a great line. That is a brilliant line. That's a credit to Dennis Spooner writing. Great dialogue in that one. I kind of like Stephen's, one of his early lines when he just, after he stumbles into the TARDIS and kind of recovers a little bit. And Stephen tells the Doctor, "Look, Doctor, I've seen some spaceships in my time, admittedly nothing like this. Well, what does this do?" And the Doctor replies, "That is the dematerialization control, and that over yonder is the horizontal hold. Up there's the scanner, those are the doors, that is a chair with a panda on it. Sheer poetry, dear boy. Now please stop bothering me."
You have to love that banter between the two. It's just incredible. It's wonderful.
And that dialogue is scripted perfectly for Hartnell's Doctor, in my opinion.
Oh yes.
It just sings with his personality. I just love like that's a chair with a panda on it. The one you brought in, yeah. So just great. Any other lines that you liked?
Well, we also mentioned Edith and the Doctor, and granted, okay, this one just made me chuckle. It's when she pours the mead in the drinking horn. It's like, oh, what's this? She says, mead. He's like, mead. Oh, mead. Yes, of course. Yes. How nice of you. Yes, delightful. Thank you. Well, here's to your very good health. I love that moment because he's just so kind of thrown back by the fact this woman is offering him something to drink, and he seems almost taken aback by it. I love that.
Yeah, he's probably like, "Yep, still got it."
Exactly. Doctor Who lover boy.
Yeah, exactly. Still get like ahead of the Aztecs, and yep, here we go again. Yeah, all right. All right. That's a very obscure joke if you're a Hartnell fan. Another exchange between the Doctor and Stephen where They're talking about the cliffs where they had landed. And the doctor says, "Now, I suggest we take a walk along the beach and try to find a spot where the cliffs run down to sea level." Stephen replies, "Yeah, but that could be miles. I'd much rather go. It'd be much quicker to go up here." And the doctor replies, "Yes, and it possibly might. But I'm not a mountain goat, and I prefer to go walking any day, and I hate climbing."
Yeah, that was brilliant. I mean, like I said, Spooner just brought his A game to the table with this one.
Yeah, he writes an excellent first Doctor, in my opinion. Any other lines?
No, I think that's pretty much it, because if not, I'd end up quoting the entire serial, Charles, because it was already hard to narrow it down.
Yes.
I mean, I think they gave us a tough time, this one, because I was just enjoying it constantly. I had this huge grin on my face. It makes you laugh. It's just a wonderful, wonderful serial.
Yeah. I have one quick one before we go. It's exchange between Stephen and Vicki, where she's actually makes a very astute observation when it comes to companions, where Stephen says, "I'm beginning to like the idea of being a crew member on a time machine." And Vicki says, "A crew member? You'll be lucky. He's the crew. We're just the passengers."
That's a great one. Definitely very good. I could see that one like on the back of a Doctor Who book or dictionary one.
Right, exactly. So what was your rating for this one?
Oh, I'm going to give it, let me see. I think nine skipping vinyls out of 10.
You really like this one, yeah.
Yes, indeed I did, sir.
Yeah, I was actually thinking along the very similar lines. I'm just under yours, but I really enjoy this one. So I give it 8.5 out of 10 anachronistic gramophones.
Very nice. See, we both love music.
Exactly.
We're both music lovers.
But that was a great tip, and very clever of the Doctor to kind of pick up on the chanting that all of a sudden starts skipping, and exactly. So this is why CD's better than vinyl, kids. Just saying.
Or go digital. See, where was his MP3 player?
Right.
He could have had it.
Right. It's like, where was that at? No. That's probably, he forgot about that with a microwave, I guess. I don't know.
Or maybe he just loves those little cracks in vinyl like people do,
Or, more likely, the monk is a vinyl snob. And if you know what I mean by a vinyl snob, the more modern hipsters that say, "Oh, vinyl's better because it gives you a much richer sound." And it's like, yeah, but it's full of pops and cracks, and that's why we got rid of it and replaced it with CDs. Well, but okay.
To each their own.
To each their own. If you're a vinyl aficionado, I respect that, and no criticisms, but I will make fun of you from time to time. All right, all right. So reverse the polarity segment. Obviously, we're running a little long, so I'm just going to breeze right through this one. Nick, did you happen to have anything you recommend from the modern era if you watched this story?
It was tough. It was tough. But the one that I think maybe is closest to it is Last of the Time Lords. Because of the fact that there's the Master in this case, and he traps the Doctor like in the Time Meddler. So that kind of made me think of. I would say that's the closest I think I could get was Last of the Time Lords. How about you?
That's very clever. I think obviously that has resonance, and I think you're definitely. I think that's a very worthy story. I went a different route. I went the Viking route. So I ended up picking The Girl Who Died, and that was
nice
the 5th episode from Series 9 in 2015. Written by Jamie Matheson and Stephen Moffat. This is the one where the TARDIS lands back in Viking times, and they come across, they meet a Shielder, Maisie Williams from Game of Thrones, and obviously they go through a whole big series of events, and at the end of the story, the Doctor ends up making a Shielder immortal. And
that has huge ramifications.
Exactly, huge ramifications. So we have, and she goes through time, and essentially she becomes very bitter and resentful. So it's kind of like the Doctor's actions kind of creating a much more dangerous threat. as a result. And obviously, you had someone, who becomes immortal compared to a Time Lord, another rogue Time Lord like the monk. So kind of similar. And but someone that's obviously very affected by the Doctor's actions, and that's kind of where I was thinking.
Oh yeah, I love that too. I mean,
both stories are great. You can't go wrong either way, in my opinion. So
exactly.
Why don't you do yourself a favor? Just watch both, okay? Watch both of those.
Exactly.
All right.
You have your marching orders, kids.
Exactly. Well, you got a lot of time to kill. Doctor Who's not back to what? March 2020? We got some time. So, now we did get some listener feedback really quickly from Holly Mack. Was kind enough to write in about the Time Meddler. So
hey, Holly, who recently celebrated her birthday as well.
Yes, she did. She had a birthday yesterday, so happy belated birthday, Holly. And I wished her happy birthday, and hope everybody out there does as well. Holly writes in, hello, Charles and Nick. So good shout out to Nick already. A first Doctor and Vicki story. She writes in, Stephen doesn't quite know what to make of the TARDIS. I loved his IDBI, I don't believe it line. Yeah, that was a great one, obviously. Love the Doctor's second rule about not calling him Doc. So that the first rule is the Doctor lies. Second rule is don't call him Doc, I guess.
Or Doctor.
Yeah. There was that little bit at the end where Stephen says Doc, and then the Doctor shoots him a look, and then Stephen has to finish Tor. So that's pretty funny. Again, great writing by Dennis Spooner. That rule is stuck for the most part throughout the whole series, with the occasional slide here and there. Tegan was kind of fun of calling the fifth Doctor Doc, if you recall. The monk as a renegade Time Lord, or is he a precursor to the Master? ? We talked about that. Just the interactions between the monk and the Doctor, and how the Doctor doesn't trust him, speak volumes. And Vicki and Stephen discovering that the monk has a TARDIS was a great turn in the story that I didn't see coming when I first saw this. Yeah, it is a nice twist, isn't it? Because you didn't expect that in the Hartnell era. Or just a very helpful Time Lord who wants to speed things up just so that those in the past can enjoy them now. No, I think the monk has more selfish motives in mind.
Like selfies with famous people.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. The monk. You could totally see the monk having a selfie stick. Really. Let me throw it up on the Instagram.
Exactly. Hashtag famous people I know.
Hashtag monk life.
I love it. That's great. I could put that on a t-shirt.
There you go. Hashtag monk life. Let's see what else. Holly writes in. She says, the ending with the Doctor shrinking the monk's TARDIS was a nice touch. An enjoyable episode. Wish we had more stories with the Time Meddler. Who knows, maybe in the future. I'll wrap it up here. Holly from Wisconsin. So thank you for writing in, Holly. I do know that Big Finish has done some monk stories. So if you obviously played by a different actor than Peter Butterworth, obviously. But so I recommend checking those out. I can't remember the specific ones offhand, but I'm sure if you do a search for Doctor Who Big Finish, the monk, you should be able to find some, I'm guessing. All right, so please check those out. And thanks again for writing, Holly. It's always great. And Holly will make her Next Stop Everywhere return to talk another classic story in the near future. So I'll just tease that there. I'll tease that right there. She did a great job her first time. So
she did. Well, there is to be said, she has a great podcast in her own right. So she definitely is good at what she does.
Exactly. So yeah, the Five-ish Fangirls podcast. I'm going to give them another plug because they've been really good to the show in recent weeks. So I'm going to give them some love in return. All right. If you want to be like Holly, and please do, write to us at nextstopeverywheresmg@gmail.com. Or on Twitter at NextStopSMG. You can reach us there. Please do. Or on Facebook at Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast. Or you can reach us on the Instagram, where you're not looking at the Monk's Instagram page. You can reach ours at Next Stop Everywhere podcast. And you can drop us a line there and, hashtag Monk Life. Nick, where can they reach you on the interwebs?
Well, when it comes to me, for all you fans of country music out there, if you're like a new country, traditional country, and everything else in between, you can catch us on the Whiskey and Cigarettes show that airs every Sunday from 5 p.m. or should I say 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern time. For more information about that, you can go on exactly as Charles shows this beautiful T-shirt. Check out the beautiful T-shirt that Mr. Charles is wearing there. We love that.
That's right.
Thank you so much. And yeah, so for more information about that, so you can go to our website. That's whiskeyandcigarettesshow.com. That will take you to all our social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So be sure to check us out.
Please do. Yeah, please check out Whiskey and Cigarettes. Just like what we do here, Nick is brilliant at his job. And
you're too kind.
And he's a lot of fun, and he deserves all the accolades. So give him all the love, people. Yeah. That's my recommendation right off the bat. All right.
Yes, thank you.
Prego. So other than that, let's see. Obviously, as for me, you can reach at me at Charles Skaggs on Twitter, at Charles Skaggs on Instagram, Facebook at Charles Skaggs in Hilliard, Ohio. Would definitely appreciate that if you did. And my blog at Geeky Things.
Damn good coffee. And hot.
Damn good coffee and hot. Where I talk about all the stuff we talk about here on Next Stop Everywhere. Doctor Who, Torchwood, Sarah Jane Adventures, all kinds of comic book sci-fi news of my other podcasts they do for Southgate Media, including Titan Talk, the Titans podcast, where Jesse and I just reopened Titans Tower to talk Titans Season 2. We just did that this morning. So our new episode 37, Trigon, will be being released hopefully tomorrow, right along with this one. And if you're a fan of the DC Universe series Titans, please check that out. Jesse and I are having a lot of fun. We were recently on the Phantom Zone podcast, where we talked Krypton Season 2 and just spent a week discussing The Boys, the Amazon Prime series based on the comic book by Garth Ennis and Derek Robertson. We had a lot of fun doing that, but as we kind of helped fill the gap between last season of Doom Patrol and the new season 2 of Titans. And then also Ghostwood, the Twin Peaks podcast we do with Zan Sprouse, whom you've heard here on Next Stop Everywhere, and where we talk all things Twin Peaks, David Lynch, etc., etc. We're trying to get up to, I think we're very close to getting 100 likes on our Facebook page. We'd definitely appreciate that if you could give us a little love there. We'd definitely appreciate that, and also appreciate it if you check out our podcast. We have a lot of fun talking Twin Peaks and David Lynch. Other than that, next time on Next Stop Everywhere, John Takis returns to Next Stop Everywhere. Always great to have John here. And we're going to talk a Peter Davison story, y'all. We're going to talk Warriors of the Deep. Now, this, believe it or not, is my least favorite Peter Davison story ever.
Seriously.
So it's going to be an interesting discussion. This is one that John suggested, and after months and months of waiting for a Peter Davison episode, he gives me Warriors of the Deep. So, but obviously it's Next Stop Everywhere. I'm going to talk about it, right? So we're going to have a lot of fun. I'm sure there'll be a lot of tongue-in-cheek humor from yours truly. I will bite my tongue as much as I can to be nice. And maybe I'll have fun with the rewatch. We'll see. And maybe now that I'm older, a little wiser, maybe I'll come to appreciate the story a little more than when I was a wee young Doctor Who fan back in the day.
You never know.
You never know. And then, so that's why we try to have these appreciation for classic stories, right? So I guess I can't be any exception to my own rules, right? Okay, so everybody, thank you so much for listening. Nick, thank you so much for returning.
You're very welcome.
I hope you had a good time.
Oh, I had a wonderful, wonderful time. And actually, before we do close the doors of the TARDIS here, the last thing I wanted to say was, with your permission, I would like to dedicate today's episode to the memory of Terrance Dicks, who a lot of people, of course, know was incredibly important in Doctor Who history. He wrote some of my all-time favourite stories, The War Games, for example, from Patrick Troughton, The Brain of Morbius, and others. So, with your permission, I would like to dedicate this episode to Terrance Dicks' memory. Rest in peace.
I think that is a perfect suggestion, sir. Terrence Dicks is one of my favorite writers as well from the classic era. He wrote one of my favorite stories, The Five Doctors, which is one of the stories that helped get me hooked on Doctor Who. He also wrote such other great stories like Robot, The Brain of Morbius, Horror of Fang Rock, State of Decay, and others. He's much missed. A lot of people, a lot of Doctor Who fans know him as simply Uncle Terrence or Uncle Terry, and he wrote a lot of Target novel adaptations of classic Who stories that, back in the day we didn't have a lot of, get to see a lot of these classic stories on video because they weren't released yet. So all we had were these Target novelizations to kind of read and get an idea of the stories that we had missed, and just because we were younger and didn't get to see them. So Doctor Who community obviously lost someone extremely important, and our best wishes to the family of Terrence Dicks and all of his fans. So
yes, indeed. Long life.
Exactly. So, Nick, once again, thank you very much for joining us. Look forward to your next appearance here on Next Stop Everywhere. You're not getting
look forward to it.
You're not getting out of it that easily, sir.
And I thought I could pack up and leave.
I know, right? Just when they think you can get out, we pull you back in.
Exactly. And plus, now with Titans, oh Lord, is it amazing? Wow. Okay, yeah. But that's a story for another time.
Yeah. I'm sure we have to talk him and returning for our big Titans season 2 wrap-up special down the line. So stay tuned for that, kids. All right. Everybody, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. John Tack is coming back to Next Stop Everywhere to talk Warriors of the Deep. It's going to be a lot of fun. And we see you next time right here at Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast. Goodbye, everybody.